Alright guys, so next I installed the wing stands on the wing itself. As you can see, there's the 10mm nuts. There's 3 of them down there. And there's this bolt and nut that goes through the tab sticking out of the wing to align everything. And you tighten that last. I tightened the 3 first, and then tighten that last. On both sides here, I put some painter's tape on the bottom of the wing stand. I covered up the studs. Now, my plan to do this may differ from what you've seen online, but this is just my plan, and we'll see if it works out in the end. But I made a jig here. I have vice grips on it, and I ground a piece of aluminum with a point on it there, and then I use a C-clamp on this side, and I did the same on that side. So what this allowed me to do is I'm going to start with the front hole towards the front of the car. So I aligned point to point the jig like that for the hole spacing for the front, and then I took that and just visually by eye I aligned it in between these cutouts for the hole I'm going to drill, and the first hole I'm going to drill in the trunk is from the bottom here. So that was my DIY template to get started, and since I made the points on the aluminum and they aligned perfectly with the center of the hole of the front, all I did was lightly rub it back and forth. So I have a mark there and a mark here. I still have to make the other crosshair mark to get the distance the same on each side, but the most critical part was getting the width correct in the first place here. So if anyone's curious of how far this is from the edge, it's about 0.3850. You can see I have the calipers here, that the mark I made is about 0.3850 from the tangent part of that radius there. And then over here I made sure, well, I flipped this around, but you can see that pretty much dead nuts the same. So I hit it by eye pretty accurately when I made my marks. Okay, so what I've done here is I took a little piece of cardboard, traced it, and then made it and then cut it with scissors so it'd line up perfectly with this contour here. And I used my calipers, just like I showed you before, the 0.3850 measurement, and kind of just eyeballed where the center was of this, made a little dot on the cardboard with the calipers. Now what I'm going to do is take a center punch through the cardboard in this location. That way I can flip it upside down and center punch it again on this side, and theoretically it's a mirror image of it, so that will align my height. So by doing that, I've located the holes accurately because I've already established my side to side with that mark I made, and now I'm going to establish up and down. So that will constrain the 2 holes, center punch it, I'll center drill it, and then I'll use my roto-cut kit to put the first set of holes in there. Okay, so we'll come around to the other side, and I'm going to flip this upside down. I still got my hole there. So I'm going to go ahead and line everything up. As you can see, I have a little center. You probably can't pick it up because the GoPro won't focus on it, but I got a little spot to start my center drill on that side, and a little spot to start my center drill on this side. Alright, so after center drilling, you'll see I got a nice spot to work with for my drill bit. Alright, so this is the roto-cut kit I got off Amazon for like $68. It's a little pricey, but it's a really nice kit, and you're going to use this for a lot of stuff in your garage moving forward, so I highly recommend getting one of these. I have cutters in the sizes of 5/16 all the way up to 3/4 here, and I'm going to use the smallest one, which is 5/16, which is essentially identical to 8mm, which is what the through holes are in the CR trunk. So there's 2mm oversized from the actual hardware that goes through them to give a little bit of play. So the way this works is you take this center arbor here, and it's got this little pin on it, and it's spring loaded. So what you do is you drill those holes that I just center drilled and located. You want to get a drill bit in the mid-range of this diameter, not larger than this so this whole pin falls through, but right in the center range, because this is turned perfectly center, and when you push this in the trunk on the hole you drilled, it'll stay centered for the cutting bit you use. You take your cutting bit out, and this just threads right onto the end of the arbor, and it's a nice 4-flute annular cutter. So this is what the tool will look like assembled. You got a little washer underneath the cutting bit, you got your 5/16 inch roto cut bit, and you just put this end in the drill. Alright, so this bit here happens to measure about 1/8 of an inch. So make sure you choose a drill bit below that size, probably around 100 thou, or 089 would be a good one to use. Okay, next, so I put some painter's tape over where the wing stand holes are going to be before I drill the hole through, just to avoid the paint cracking and spreading. Okay, I've got my pilot holes drilled on each side now. Put a little oil on the surface I'm going to drill just to help with the cutting. As you can see, I'm about halfway through right now. These cutters have a much cleaner concentric cut than a drill bit that may walk. And actually, it's like a hole saw. It takes a material away with the flutes and leaves a piece of steel in the center, and then it'll punch through. Alright, so hopefully I was accurate enough. Got the first 2 holes ready. So that's all the drilling I'm going to do from the bottom for now. I'm going to flip it over now and work from the top. So here's a view from the top of those 2 holes. You can see up close a little bit of paint did chip around it, but I got touch-up paint for that. Nothing too crazy though. Okay, so on these CR wings, you got the 2 welded studs in the rear. I'm going to be drilling those holes next and then finish with the center ones. So I took the studs that I made from M6 hardware laying around, just cut the head off of the bolt. But I'm going to use those to locate this on the top and drop these 2 studs in the holes I just created. And then I'm going to kind of use the painter's tape as a little guide of when I'm going to apply kind of pressure and wiggle this back and forth to make marks in the painter's tape for the rear studs, and then center punch where those marks are, and do the same process through the top for the rear holes. Center up the 2 studs, and they should line up perfectly if you did the first step right, and they did for me, so that's good news. Try to center them the best you can. I'm just going to wiggle this wing around back and forth, left and right, and try to get an idea of where that stud's going to land on the painter's tape. So you'll see I got a mark here and a mark here of where the stud scratched the paint. I'm going to center punch those and then ream the holes through the top. So one thing is I noticed from the top is the sheet metal is very bendy, so I don't really want to snap the center punch down and potentially bend the trunk. So I kind of just pushed down and it made a mark in the paint to where my center drill will pick up here in a second. Okay, so now I got my 2 center holes here. I'm gonna put a little center drill spot in there for the drill bit. Alright, and for the center holes, now that my studs drop through the rears, I just relocated those studs in the center of that mount. And the front currently doesn't have bolts in it. And what I'm doing is I'm grabbing both wing stands and using the studs and going in a circular motion while pushing down on those studs to try to kind of give a circle for where that those studs scribe on the painter's tape here. And I'm going to pull this up and mark the center of that scribed circle and do the same process. So you'll see that the rubbing the studs on there gave kind of an impression of the circular cutout I'm going to need. So you can just eyeball it, since the 8mm holes have a millimeter of slop on each side, since they're oversized from the studs. So you should have pretty good success, and doesn't need to be laser accurate here. Alright, so I just did a quick test fit and all the hardware lines up perfectly. So great success on the method I used to drill the holes. Everything looks perfectly centered and square on the trunk lid in the OEM location. Here are the holes. 6 holes we drilled. So now you can access these 2 with the hardware underneath the trunk, no problem. These 2 will need to have more drilling done to put the the hardware in from the bottom. So I'm going to go from the top using a larger drill bit. This doesn't have to be super accurate because you're going to oversize it to 3/4 inch about hole diameter to fit whatever hardware down, a socket or whatnot down in there to secure the nut and the bolt. All right, so next thing I did is I came through the back 2 holes with a regular center punch that was included with the RotoCut kit, and I just hit it with a hammer here, and you can see it left a little divot right here and then down here. Same with the other side. You can see in the light here that there's a divot right there, and then another spot right back there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recenter punch it back from this side, do the same process. I'm going to center drill it, drill a pilot hole, and then use like a 3/4 inch cutter, which is the largest diameter in my RotoCut kit, to make the access holes for the hardware. Alright, so I got all 4 of my pilot holes drilled here. As you see, the 2 there, 2 over here, and I got my drill fitted with the largest cutter available from the RotoCut kit, which is a 3/4 inch. It's going to be a little tricky because you're not drilling on anything flat here. You got this bend right here that you're going to be going over for the hole. You got these 2 high spots here before you hit the spot where I center drilled here. Same on the other side, but this pin does stick out pretty far, which will compensate for all that. And like I said, you know, before, it's spring loaded, so it's going to go retract all the way in there when you make your cut. Alright, so you'll see I got my 2 3/4 inch holes drilled out. I'm going to get a magnet down in there to take out the piece that just fell through. Repeat on the other side. And I think based on the pictures I saw online, these are a little smaller of access holes compared to the CR trunks, so a little cleaner job in my opinion. But if you do drop hardware in there, it might be almost impossible to get your fingers in there. Maybe you can with the CR trunk, I'm not sure, but I'll use a magnet anyway if I ever do drop the hardware in there. Not a big deal. So here's a final look at the 3 holes, and all my drilling for the wing itself is complete. Nailed them all pretty good. So the next steps will involve making the plates to strengthen this area out of 16 gauge steel, which I have right here from Lowe's. And once that's complete, then I'll work on drilling the holes and inserting threaded inserts, rivnuts, for the CR wing here, the reinforcement downforce plates there, and then drilling the 4 holes up here for the trunk bumpers to fully complete this CR trunk conversion. As you can see on the OEM trunks, they have little divots here, which looks like drill points for you to drill out for these items here, but ignore those completely because those have nothing to do with the bumper I'm about to show you. And the way I'm going to do this is these don't need to be centered absolutely perfectly or located perfectly on there. They just need to be in the general area of the CR trunk. And I referenced some pictures online to get an idea. But I'm going to scribe my center marks with the calipers. My original idea was to use touch-up paint on here and then just touch it to the trunk, but I feel I can be more accurate just scribing with the sharp points of this caliper. So the spacing between the 2 is about 30 millimeters, so I'm going to go ahead and transfer that to the trunk, scribe a little line about right here, and then drill those 2 center punch it, center drill it, then drill it to the correct size, which I'm going to use a 3/16 drill bit. I use the calipers to measure the diameter of these plastic plugs, and it's like 177. So this is a 188 drill bit, so about 10 thou oversized. The next size down is a 155 I have, so that's not going to work. So I'm going to go with this one, and hopefully these snap right in. Alright, so I got them center drilled here, and just to show you, kind of a good idea to go by is where this OEM bumper ends here, pretty much straight above is where you'll start your first hole, with 30 millimeters to the left of that for this side, and opposite for this side. You'll see that that's pretty much in line with the edge of this, 30 millimeters to the right. Got it center drilled, and now I'm going to go take the 3/16 bit and drill all 4 of those out. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to line touch-up paint around it so there's no bare steel exposed, and then I'm going to pop these guys in. Alright, so now that these holes are done and ready for touch-up paint, I'm going to move on to drilling these here. Now, as you can see in the bottom one here, this slot's a little narrower, so this kind of locates all constraints besides left and right here. And this hole on top here is a little bit oversized, so you have a little slop to play with. Now I've marked the Sharpie there, kind of just eyeballing the radius around the trunk stopper here. There's no measurements online I could go off of, and I kind of just looked at pictures and kind of just, estimated it. It is slotted, so you don't have to be exact. You're going to be adjusting this later on. So I'm going to drill the first hole first and get a depth measurement. And my plan, instead of using these self-tapping screws called out in the S2KI DIY, I'm going to use rivnuts and use an M6 rivnut to use an actual M6 bolt to tighten these down, because the OEM CR trunk actually uses has PEM studs protruding from the trunk that are pressed into the sheet metal before it's mated with this piece of sheet metal here. So I'm going to try to stay true to the design of it using M6 hardware. I'm going to need a depth measurement though, because that's the only thing with the rivnut, is it needs to be deep enough to actually deform this in there and use this tool properly. So if it is too shallow and this is too deep, I'll probably take this to the belt sander and shave it down a little bit, because I do have a few threads to work with on this, so we'll see how that goes. So now that I've got a hole drilled, I'm going to use a smaller drill bit than I just used to slide down in there and get a depth measurement. Just going to put my fingernail to the edge of it, and it looks like that's how much we have. Compare that to the rivnut here. Okay, so I'm going to drill this out now using an 11/32 bit. No going back now. A very large hole there, but it should be able to drop my rivnut right in. It's very close. Alright, so this is the rivnut tool I got off Amazon for 40 bucks, and it came with 10 of like each thread size, including 10 of the M6. And basically you thread this in, and then you pull these handles, and it crushes like a rivet. It deforms those notched material in there and makes it a permanent threaded insert. So first time using this, I didn't shave any material off the top. I think that when I push this in and start to crush it, I can continue to push it in a little more to help get this top flange seated flush on the trunk. Okay, so with the rivnut pressed in, looks pretty good. You got an M6 threaded insert there for a shallow bolt that you're going to need to pick up. I'm going to pick up some stainless button head cap screws for that. And then now you can use, you can even use the hardware that came with the wing now, which is an M6 piece here, and bolt this down right on the front here. And once you get it tightened down, then you can mark your center location and try to put it in the center of the slot. As you can see here, you got some adjustability. Make sure it's not too long. I just screwed up and used too long of a bolt that started pushing on the sheet metal underneath when I was tightening it down ever so slightly, and screwed up the paint. I made a little divot in the back of the side of the trunk. Good thing this is a spare trunk, but I'm still pretty pissed off about it. Tightening this bolt down, so make sure it's shallow enough so it won't put pressure on the back side. But anyway, I kind of just got it centered in that slot, rotated it, and then eyeballed a center punch mark on that slot right in the center, with it kind of parallel here at the edge of the trunk. I'm going to go ahead, center drill it, and then drill it out to 11/32 and do the second M6 rivnut. Okay, so this worked out pretty well. Here's the two threaded inserts. I'll throw some test hardware in there right now to show you what it looks like. Alright, you'll see I got two M6 test bolts in there just to show you everything lined up. And this is the adjustability you have when you go to mate it to the piece on the car. Alright, so I just got done swapping trunk lids, and I swapped over the key mechanism for the opening the trunk so my OEM key works, since the trunk I bought off of eBay didn't include their key. This is the one out of the trunk. This is very simple to remove. There's just one E-clip and two 10mm head bolts. There is a way, and I know there's threads online, maybe there's even YouTube videos. I haven't really looked yet to see if there's a way to repin this for my OEM key. I know there's a way to take it apart and mess with the tumbler and repin it. So I may do that in my spare time moving forward, but for right now, it took 3 minutes to swap this unit over between the trunks. No problem there. And here's a quick test fit on the car. It doesn't stick past the rear brake light at all. It's very close to flush, just like the OEM CR. Of course, it looks kind of goofy now with the painter's tape and the wing covers aren't on it. And of course, it's in primer black. So I'm going to get this painted red, just to make it look like an OEM match to the car.